Good at, Leonard Williams came out. He's a pretty good pick too now. And so, every year you have some guys that can ball. I would say that this is a very good year, however.
I can tend to agree. There's a lot of really good edge players. I'm a huge fan of Jordan Willis. Um, I do think that he's one of the better complements for what Vic Beasley provides on the other end. So in that same vein, Digital Demon asks, what's the ideally perfect complement on edge to match with Beasley, and who's the closest to that in this draft?
I'd go and get a contrast guy, a big, uh, you know, strong defensive end type guy who could also kick inside a little bit. I wouldn't be mad, I don't know if they would have the opportunity to get him, but if you're looking for a first round guy that would be perfect, it'd be Jonathan Allen to me. You put him opposite Vic Beasley, and you put Beasley on the weak side. Let Jonathan Allen basically be your Michael Bennett. Let him play a little, left defensive end, strong defensive end, early downs, kick inside, and three technique on later downs. And you get him, Poe, Jackson, and Vic Beasley on the field, and you cook him with fish grease.
So in that same vein, what are your thoughts on Jordan Willis? He's one of those guys that I've been a big fan of through the process, and his combine just kind of stood out to me, but he does have good film on top of it. What have you seen of him?
I haven't watched him at all.
Not at all. Bad question then.
All right, Stephen, we appreciate you coming on and giving us your time. You got any other upcoming profiles that you're going to be dropping on SB Nation between now and the draft, or anything else on deck that you want to plug?
Oh yeah, we'll be pumping them out all the way up to draft day. As a matter of fact, there's like two already done, just waiting to be published. And like I said, I'm working on Takaris McKinley now. After that, I think maybe Forrest Lamp. But the most current one is Corey Davis, and I love this guy. He's like a Brandon Marshall clone without the Brandon Marshall baggage. He's a wide receiver out of Western Michigan. I have no idea how he ended up in Western Michigan. Maybe he was a late bloomer or something, but this kid is the real deal. Got a few drops here and there, but you can put up with that for all the other things that he gives you, especially just the run after catch, man. This dude, people talk about Laquan Treadwell last year. He was very physical, but I'm not sure that he handed out as many nasty stiff arms as I saw Corey Davis hand out in 5 games. So that's what I got coming up. And, obviously we have a podcast every week that comes out as well, the Onside Kick Family Hour.
All right. Thanks, Stephen, for joining us and giving us your insights on this year's defensive line class, as well as some of your thoughts on what the Falcons can do to upgrade their pass rush this year.
Yes, sir. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right, have a good night. All right, guys, that was Stephen White. Once again, we want to thank him for joining us on the show. I know we were having a little bit of technical difficulties with the audio a little bit early on the show, but if you guys happen to miss that interview, you will be able to check it out on iTunes later on. But we want to move on, and before we move on, I do also want to plug Stephen White's Twitter, which is SGW94. And again, check them out on SB Nation and whatnot. A lot of interesting in-depth profiles on some of these top prospects, not just pass rushers. But next, we want to move on and announce the winner of the Jack Crawford signed football giveaway that we announced like a month ago. And eventually we had to pick a winner. That winner is none other than a longtime listener, Evan Birchfield, who inundates us with about 28 questions every week in the mailbag. And I guess, Evan, your many frequent questions wound up paying off for you, as you are the winner of the contest. We're going to be in touch with you to get your information on sort of getting you that signed football. But congratulations to you, Evan. All right. So we got the rest of the show mainly is just going to be us talking mailbag questions. Next week we'll have a lot more to talk about because the schedule will come out later this week, and we'll talk quite a bit about that. And that'll be the week of the draft, right? So we can sort of get any sort of last smokescreen talk that we can talk about then. As you know, these next couple of days is going to just be full of like, oh, the Falcons are taking a quarterback. If Deshaun Kaiser's there, well, he's going to take him. But I don't know, those types of smokescreen stuff. So our first question comes from Andy at Falcons Andy on Twitter. He asked, could Samson Ebukam be a surprise high pick from a team who falls in love with his athleticism and potential?
Well, the question here is what's considered a high pick? I mean, I think a team could be like, yeah, he's great, he's really athletic, we like him, and take him in the 4th. But I don't see anything before day 3. The film just doesn't warrant it. He's what I like to call a Ricky Bobby guy. Has no idea what the hell he's doing with his hands. He's fast as hell. He's a great athlete. He's got good instincts, but he just cannot. He's probably better off being an inside linebacker, for being honest.
Fair enough. Before he had his pro day, and he blew up his pro day, and he was like, I think he was a 99th percentile from Spark in terms of his testing at his pro day, which, he was a 2 Sigma athlete, and there's only maybe been like 6 of those guys that tested like that this offseason. So he's in an elite class in terms of athleticism. But before that, I sort of saw him as a 6th, 7th round sort of target for the Falcons or some other team that could sort of take a flyer on a small school guy that, showed athleticism on tape. But, I certainly did not expect him to test as well as he wound up testing. But with that pro day, I do think he'll probably wind up moving up in the 4th round range. Yeah, I don't see him quite moving up into the day 2 range, but I could certainly see him being a 4th round pick or 5th round at the latest, given sort of his athletic potential. And I do think the Falcons would be interested in him. They did work him out over the weekend, so that's something to keep your eye on if we get to day 4. And I think he would probably be seen more as a Sam linebacker than a true edge, but we'll see. It could go either way. All right, our next question comes from Digital Demon at Digital Demon 6. He says, in my opinion, Buda Baker is the best single high safety in this class. I think he is the ideal fit in Atlanta. 1st rounder, and if not, when?
I mean, I've got a top 10 grade on Buda Baker. I really like him. But I don't know if Atlanta should take him at 31. I think if they are going to take him, it's probably going to be after a trade down out of the 1st round, probably in that 40 to 45 range. Take him there. And then people will go, oh, my God, the 1st pick was spent on the safety, but they'll also pick up like a 3rd round pick. So it'll be more acceptable when they've got 2 seconds and 2 thirds. I'm like, all right, well, we got a safety, then we got an edge, and like, I don't know, Tack McKinley or someone who falls to the 2nd, and then they get a guard at the top of the 3rd, and then they're fine.
Okay. Yeah, for me with Buda Baker, I don't think he's going to be a Falcons target in the 1st round. I would be surprised if the Falcons took him at 31. That's what I'll say. Like, I don't think it's impossible, but I think he's more of like their 4th or 5th option at that point. And I would be surprised if one of the top 3 options would be all gone at that point. So for me, it's one of those things where I think he'll definitely go in the top 40, 45 picks. Whether it's in Atlanta, I'm not so sure. All right. Digital Demon, the follow-up question is, if we do take Buda Baker in the 1st, would you address guard or defensive end in the 2nd, and who would your picks be?
All depends on who falls. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the 2nd round defensive ends. I mean, you could get it. If a guy like Rivers does fall there, you're good. And David Charles Harris. I'm not a huge fan of like the Tim Williams or the Takk McKinley types. I mean, I know you could get them there, but I just don't think they're great in terms of athletically or in terms of what they bring on the field or off the field. I mean, Takk McKinley's good off the field, but I don't really trust Tim Williams. So, I mean, there's not a lot we could really see. I'd rather just pass on edge completely and look at more of that that defensive lineman, that Chris Wormley type, because I think that's going to provide a lot more value long term than someone like, that get that strong side down like what Steven was talking about, than getting, an edge like a Takk McKinley.
Yeah, I mean, all things being equal, I would go defensive end in the second round if it was me, just because I would put a little bit more emphasis on that spot than the guard position. But yeah, it really just depends on who's gonna be there. Like, you could certainly convince me that whether it's a guy like Dorian Johnson or Dan Feeney or Deion Dawkins, there were certainly those three guards I'd probably value more than some of the edges that potentially could be available in the second round. So I would certainly be willing to pull the trigger on one of those guys. I do think there's going to be a lot of good guards that are going to be available throughout round two. I think we're going to see a bunch of, I say guards, I meant edges. I think we're going to see maybe 6 or 7 edges go in round two. I don't think there's going to be as many first round edges as people think there are. I think there might be 4, maybe 5 guys that go in the first round. And I think a lot of these guys that people are being talked about being in the mix for the Falcons at pick 31, like a Derek Rivers, like a Takk McKinley, like a Jordan Willis, like a TJ Watt, I think several of those guys are still going to be available well into the second round. Now, whether all of those guys are available when the Falcons come back on the board at 63, I think is certainly up for debate. But I do think several of those guys are going to, wind up going in the 40s and 50s and maybe 60s as opposed to the 20s and 30s, as many people seem to be predicting. Piggybacking on a little bit of what Scott said, Digital Demon's next question is, would DeMarcus Walker or Chris Wormley be a dark horse for the Falcons in round 2?
I don't think DeMarcus Walker's going to be on the Falcons' radar, honestly. I don't think he's really that good in the first place, but he's also not a great athlete. I know Aaron's probably going to say, well, athleticism's not huge for this team, but when it comes to the defensive line, it feels like they do seem to care a lot about it. And a guy who runs a 7.913 cone probably won't be super high on the board for an interior defensive lineman. I mean, I could see Tana Passignon well over DeMarcus Walker in second if you're looking for that surprise kind of second-round pick.
Well, my point on the athleticism, Scott, isn't that athleticism isn't a big thing with the team. I just disagree with the point that if you run a certain 3-cone, you're going to be removed from the team's board. Now, a 7.9 is probably one of those numbers that a guy would probably get removed from the board, particularly for an edge guy. But like a guy that runs a 7.3 or a 7.4, I don't think is going to be that big of a deal breaker for the Falcons. The issue with Walker, and that 3-cone is so bad that I'm curious what he did at his pro day. But I think that with Walker and specifically, I wouldn't see the Walker as an option for the Falcons in round 2. Maybe at the end of round 3, I think the Falcons might pull the trigger on Walker, primarily with the idea that he's going to be Adrian Claiborne's replacement as that sort of inside-outside player that's going to primarily rush from the inside. I do think the Falcons have a wealth of those types of guys right now with Claiborne, with Upshaw, with Jack Crawford, with Derek Shelby. So I don't think Walker would be particularly high on the Falcons' priority list. But maybe, at the end of round 3 or maybe even in round 4, if he slides that far. Wormley, I think Wormley's a good player. I would have difficulty seeing them taking Wormley in round 2, just not because I don't think he's worth that pick, but I just would be surprised if the Falcons went D tackle, interior D lineman that early in the draft. Wormley is another one of those guys that's sort of that inside outside guy. I think the value of Wormley is that he can play multiple techniques in the league. I could see him being a 1 technique. I could see him being a 3 technique. I could see him being a 5 technique. Even if he, if he slimmed down a little bit, I could see him even playing some of that 6 tech outside stuff, more as a base guy than a every down guy. But he certainly has the athleticism that you want at that position. So I wouldn't be completely shocked, but I would say it's probably a low probability for him in round 2. I would be surprised given some of the other positions that I think the Falcons are likely to prioritize for them to go for more of an interior guy that early in the draft. Now, round 3, I think that's more likely that the Falcons will take an interior guy like Wormley, but I don't think he's probably going to be there at pick 95 or whatever. Cream at Peanut JB93. What are your thoughts if we get Malcolm McDowell at 31?
Oi. I mean, I don't trust Malcolm McDowell off the field. Not Malcolm McDowell, Malik McDowell.
Oh, yeah. What did I say? Malcolm McDowell. Yeah, my bad.
I don't really trust Malik McDowell right now off the field. I don't know. I think he's good. I think he's a very talented player. I think he would be a great fit on the field in terms of what the Falcons want, in terms of an inside-outside, can play strong side end, can move inside to the 3 technique in the nickel, can even play a little bit of outside in the nickel, basically do what Michael Bennett does. But if they're taking him at 31, that means Dan Quinn talked to him and was like, this is my guy. He's just a young idiot right now. We've got the locker room. We've got the leaders. Beasley and Jarrett will take him under their wing, and if he steps out of line, they'll smack him around a little bit and be like, hey, get your shit together. I think that's what that pick would say. It'd also say, hi, NFC South quarterbacks. We want to destroy you.
Yeah, I would absolutely love the pick. There's a lot of reasons to be very skeptical of Malik McDowell, but I think the Falcons have shown enough so far that they at least deserve the benefit of the doubt somewhat if they were able to let him go through their process and come away thinking, no, we like the guy. I think the comparison you would make with a guy like Malik McDowell is someone like Sheldon Richardson. And I think the hope, so for me, it's hard for me to say, oh no, don't draft Malik McDowell when so many people were like, I hope the Falcons trade for Sheldon Richardson. Now, you can argue it's, you're not investing a first-round pick in Sheldon Richardson, but I think ultimately sort of the type of impact player that you're hoping Malik McDowell develops into is similar, if not better, than a player like Sheldon Richardson. And I think most people concluded that given Sheldon Richardson's immaturity issues and all those sort of coachabilities and personality quirks, whatever, it was well worth the risk. And I think Malik McDowell's sort of in the same way. I don't have any insights into his character issues. I've heard a lot of people talk about them. I don't know anything. I'm a little skeptical of when a player from Michigan State is being labeled as being a character question mark just because of the whole situation with Connor Cook last year. So I don't know how to wrap my head around that. But as far as, to me, the type of potential that Malik McDowell has, I've heard people compare him to Rashid Hageman in terms of questioning his effort and all those sorts of things. And I think those are fair comparisons and fair criticisms for McDowell. But the thing I would argue against those people is the talent disparity between Malik McDowell and Rashid Hageman is like night and day, in my opinion. I think one of the reasons why you saw so many people turn on Rashid Hageman, particularly at the beginning of the season, he sort of won many of those people back, is because there was misplaced expectations on how good and effective an NFL player Rashid Hageman was. People got it in their heads because of his athleticism that he had the potential to be a sort of a Richard Seymour, Kawan Short type of presence on the defensive line. And I just never saw him ever being that type of player. I don't even think he flashed that sort of potential ever during his time at Minnesota. And just people just got it in their heads that he was this potential dominant player that could be a dominant player in the NFL. and I don't think he ever was that guy. And so then because of those overly high expectations, people then turned on him when he didn't live up to those expectations. The thing I'll say about Malik McDowell is I think those expectations, that potential is evident in Malik McDowell that wasn't ever there in Rashid Hageman. And so if people want to say, Malik McDowell has that Mo Wilkerson, Richard Seymour type of potential, I think that's a valid point with Malik McDowell that I don't think was ever valid with Rashid Hageman. So I think, and with that being said, you can certainly make the case that the reward is worth the risk, particularly at pick 31. At pick 14 or something like that, if I wouldn't necessarily be maybe willing to roll that dice, but at pick 31, I'd say go with it and let's see what happens. All right, next question comes from D-Rock, the party. I like the Bucks Hard Knocks pick. Looks interesting, plus takes some pressure off the Falcons early. What do y'all think?
I mean, I think we've already seen this lame-ass coaching staff on Hard Knocks before. I mean, we know what Cutter and Mike Smith are going to be like on it. Super fucking boring. But, I mean, I'll watch it.
Yeah, I don't know what and how it has anything to do with the Falcons. I don't see how, 5 episodes in August on HBO is going to take pressure off the Falcons. I don't quite understand that part of it, Derek, but I would watch it. Jameis on Hard Knocks, Gerald McCoy's great. Deshaun Jackson's great. Joe Hawley's great. Brent Grimes is great. I think it would be compelling television. I think the coaching staff would be boring as heck, but I think the Bucks have more than make up for it with sort of player personality in the locker room. That would.
Oh my God, Nico Grimes.
There you go. I mean, I think it would be a very entertaining show. As long as they just steer clear of the coaching staff. But yeah, I think it would be a great show. So, I didn't watch the Rams one last year because it just wasn't compelling at all to me. And I will probably watch this year's if the Bucks are on it. Okay. Young Zach has several questions. The first one is, one of the biggest issues in Shanahan's first year as offensive coordinator was getting everyone to understand the terminology. With Sark as the new offensive coordinator, do you think Falcons will keep the same terminology and let Sark adapt, or change the terminology and let the players adapt?
Sark already runs a lot of West Coast concepts in his offense already, and is already a very heavily West Coast influenced guy. And that was the big difference, was going from that Earhart Perkins style offense to that West Coast Walsh style. And I think that Sarkisian is going to keep the same kind of terminology because he's already running it. It's like when the Falcons went from Malarkey to Cutter. It was the exact same terminology because it was the same basic system. It was just different wrinkles within the system. So Sarkisian might run the exact same plays here and there, but the difference is going to be, instead of the Falcons running that play out of an I formation, they're going to run it out of an ace with 2 tight ends. I think that's going to be the wrinkle we see from Sark. So it'll be the same kind of plays, same kind of play calls. We're really just going to see a difference in, what the exact plays themselves are going to look like and what the play calling philosophy is going to look like.
I think the Falcons have already gone ahead and said that they're planning on keeping the same terminology. I guess the easy comparison, at least the first comparison that comes to mind for me, was in Miami several years ago, back before he came to Atlanta. Mike Mularkey was asked to run his predecessor's offense. Why am I going back that far? Basically, Dirk Cutter did this same thing with taking over Mike Mularkey's offense. They didn't change the terminology, even though Dirk Cutter didn't run the same system as Mularkey. They basically just changed the offense with the same terminology that they were using under Mularkey's offense. And I think you're going to see a similar thing with Sarkisian. They're going to use the exact same terminology. Sarkisian is basically, his job is to do his best imitation of Shanahan in terms of what he thinks works. The good thing is that his job is going to be easy because so much of the Falcons offense worked last year for Shanahan that it's like basically he can just go through 1,000 plays and pick the 400 plays that he loves and be like, oh, I'll just call those plays and hopefully they work the same way. There will be changes. There will be changes to play calling. There will be changes to sort of what the Falcons do in certain situations. So I'm not saying it's going to be the exact same offense. It will certainly be different. But I think for the most part, it's just going to be Sarkisian doing his best Shanahan imitation, and we'll find out whether or not there's any drop-off this upcoming season. Young Zach's next question is, do you think Adrian Claiborne has the potential to be our Michael Bennett?
I think if the Falcons saw him as that, they would have already put him in there as that. So I think he had that potential coming in 2015. I think they're seeing that he's about a half Michael Bennett. He can do the interior rushing. He can't do the exterior rushing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting question because if you're asking, do I think he has the potential to play inside and outside? I think the answer is obviously yes, because that's basically what he's been doing the last 2 years. If you're asking me, do I think Claiborne has the potential to be as good at that as Michael Bennett is? I think the answer is fairly obvious there, that the answer is clearly no. Michael Bennett, at least, Michael Bennett, peak Michael Bennett, like 2013 to 2015 Michael Bennett, before he got hurt last year. Thanks for that, Jake Matthews, by the way. Was just arguably one of the 5 best pass rushers in the NFL. He was a force of nature. He was a dominant player. Like, if you go back and you watch that Super Bowl against the Patriots couldn't block him. Like, they had to completely adapt their entire game plan around trying to avoid Michael Bennett because he's a guy that he's basically what I call an offensive killer. Like, he's just going to completely, or a wrecker. He's going to completely wreck your offense because that's how good he is. Adrian Claiborne, while he'll do that on occasion, he's not going to do that to the level of consistency that a Michael Bennett is. But if you're talking about can Adrian Claiborne be a poor man's Michael Bennett, sure. I think he's been doing that the last 2 years. I think he did that especially last year. I think he was much better last year than he was the previous year. And you can make the argument until later in the season, he was the Falcons' best defensive lineman for about 8 or 9 weeks out of the year. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question, Zach. Your next question is also from young Zach. Chester was ranked 65th out of 64 guards by Pro Football Focus. I don't quite know how that works, but we still had a top 5 offensive line. Why should we draft offensive guard in the first 3 rounds?
Because you don't have a starter. If you don't have a starter, then what the hell's going on? Like, could Wes Schweitzer potentially be that guy? Sure. But I'd feel so much better if I had Wes Schweitzer competing against Deion Dawkins or, Dan Feeney or Nico Siragusa or, Ethan Posich or Pat Elflein or Taylor Moton, any of these guys I'm listing. Julian Davenport, any of those guys. I would love to just see him compete against any of those guys so I could see what he's got. And if he wins, then he wins. But otherwise, he's fine.
Well, I think, Zach, you're on to something there. I don't necessarily think that if the Falcons had a sort of slightly above replacement level right guard spot, they think their offensive line, I don't think that's going to be the case. I do think Wes Schweitzer is more than capable of being that guy. If the Falcons did not draft a guard in the first 3 rounds, I would understand that. If the Falcons did draft a guard in the first 3 rounds, I would completely understand that. I think this organization has shown an inclination based off of how much money they've invested in their offensive line that they do, they're the anti-Seahawks, where we've seen the Seahawks basically go the last couple of years and throw out just undrafted free agents and 7th-round picks. And ask Tom Cable to sort of make, lemonade out of lemons. And I don't think the Falcons, at least given how much they've paid Levitri and Mack and Schrader and how much they're likely to pay Jake Matthews, I'm not buying at all the talk that the Falcons would even contemplate letting him go. And the fact that they were interested in some of these top free agents, even though it sounded like they weren't willing to pay the money that some of these guys made, but they were at least interested in guys like TJ Lang and others. It seems like the Falcons are going the opposite way from the Seahawks in sort of saying we're going to maximize the investment in our offensive line because we have this soon to be probably $120 million quarterback. And we have so much of our offense is built around our running game. And we saw last season where most of the games the Falcons lost last year were games where their offensive line got their butts kicked. I do think the Falcons, at least with that attitude in mind, will have, the correct or right attitude of saying, let's use that first round pick. Let's use that second round pick on a guard. Let's keep the investment level high. Let's maximize the talent level that we have, given that we have a little bit of an older line with Levitri and Mack both being on the wrong side of 30, Schrader's 29, and to get somebody along with Jake Matthews that is going to be entering his prime over the next couple of years. So I think the Falcons could go either way as far as how high they take a guard in this year's draft, but I certainly think you can make a strong case for either decision, and I wouldn't fault them at all, either way they go. All right, we got two Justin Evans questions. The first one comes from Evan Birchfield. He says, I'm recently become obsessed with Justin Evans, the safety out of Texas A&M. What's your opinion on him? And Kyle Nelson at Hayes Nelson on Twitter asks, do you think Justin Evans would be a good pick for the Falcons in the third-ish round?
I mean, in like the third or fourth round, I'm down for it because I think he's got a lot of the same traits that, you can really do well with. As far as taking him earlier than that, like fucking Tony Pauline saying take him in the first round, he's the Falcon selection at 31. That's just stupid. I like Evans, but Evans in the first round would be the reach of all reaches. Now, say you get just Jordan Willis or Derek Rivers in the first, and you get Dan Feeney or Taylor Moton in the second, then you take Justin Evans. That I'm down for.
I do respect Tony Pauline, but I'm not quite buying Justin Evans as a late first round pick, even in the Falcons. I like Justin Evans. I see him more as a sort of a day two guy, a third round guy. I think he could be a talented NFL player. I think he could be an asset to the Falcons as a third safety. I thought the more interesting thing coming from that Tony Pauline report was that the Falcons, at least Dan Quinn, was looking to play with three safeties this year, which I still haven't fully wrapped my head around, but maybe, I don't know, the only process I can sort of think about it is if he's thinking that when we play some of these more base-oriented offenses like New England and Dallas, teams that you want to play base against, that when we go nickel, he's going to play a big nickel with three safeties as opposed to three corners. I don't know. But, I haven't wrapped my head fully around that. But, yeah, if the Falcons took Justin Evans in the third round, I'd probably be much more in favor of it than taking him in the first round. I don't see him on that level as a safety prospect. I wouldn't call him a reach if we took him at 63, but yeah, anywhere before that I think would be kind of pushing it. Evan Birchfield got the next couple of questions. His first is, any predictions or opinions on what the Falcons schedule might be like? It's releasing on Thursday night.
The only thing that I'm going to predict is that the Falcons play the Cowboys week 1 on Sunday Night Football, because we already kind of have an idea that that's what's going to happen in Atlanta. After that, the only other thing I'll predict is probably a Saints game to close the season out. Whether it's there or here, I know it's probably going to be a Saints game to close the season out. Those are my two predictions. Yeah,
I mean, it sounds like, the the reports are that they'll get a Sunday night football game that week 1, and probably the Packers or the Cowboys is the most compelling matchup. I wouldn't be totally shocked that they put the Panthers or Saints on that game, but we'll see what happens. I'll be curious to see when the Falcons get their bye week, just because the last really forever, I think can't remember the last time the Falcons didn't have a bye between like week 8 and week 10. I think maybe it's 2013. Maybe they had like a week 5, week 6 bye or something like that. But anyway, I don't have a prediction on when the Falcons will get their bye week, but yeah, I don't really have anything for you, Evan. I'm just wait and see mode. Evan Birchfield's next question is: make a hot take draft prediction.
Man, I mean, overall, I'm gonna make 2. I'm gonna make an overall one, and I'm gonna make a Falcons one. Overall hot take is gonna be Deshaun Kaiser, number 2 overall to San Francisco. I don't know why he's not getting talked about that way. He's a hell of a quarterback, and I could truly see Kyle Shanahan loving him. Just absolutely loving him. He's got the arm, he's got the mobility, he's got everything that Shanahan would love in a quarterback. And I could just see him really doing well with a guy like Kaiser. On the flip side, for the Falcons, hot take, they trade up to about 24 to take Jordan Willis. Now, I know everybody's going, oh, that's stupid. Jordan Willis will be there at 31, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I said the same thing a couple years back, that the Falcons were going to trade up for Desmond Trufant. And I pointed out 22 because they knew less need. I could see a very similar situation happening in this year's draft. You know, I see them wanting to probably get ahead of the Giants. There's connections there between Denver, Detroit, and the Dolphins. You could see a trade to any one of those 3. But around 22, from 31, give up your 3rd, give up next year's 6th. I think that's the trade to make. I know the Falcons fans will probably groan and moan and be like, oh, Jordan Willis, whatever. Because they're going to sit there, they're going to go online and be like, oh my God, what the hell happened? And then Charles will be like, no, that's a good pick. And Aaron will be like, well, I don't like it, but it's still a good pick. And I'll be like, fuck yeah, that's a great pick. I'll take losing a 3rd rounder to get the right guy. So, I mean, those are my hot takes. Atlanta trades up to 20 to 22, gives up their 3rd round pick and takes Jordan Willis. And Deshaun Kaiser goes number 2 overall.
Well, you're probably right. Regardless of what the Falcons do, my reaction is probably like, I don't really like it, but it's a good pick. My hot take draft prediction. Here we go. Is this a scorching take? Christian McCaffrey will be drafted before Leonard Fournette.
That's not a hot take. Okay. Christian McCaffrey is a better football player than Leonard Fournette, and I'll agree that he'll get taken before him. I think Fournette goes towards the end of the 1st round, and I think McCaffrey goes like 16, 17, wherever the fuck the Eagles are picking.
I think McCaffrey's going top 10.
Now, that is a hot take.
Yeah, I think he's going top 10. Or no, let me say top 12.
Top 12. Okay, I'll take top 12. Yeah. Oh, you think his floor is probably New Orleans at 11?
Yeah.
Oh shit! I don't want to see him in New Orleans. I don't want to see him in Carolina either. That means that like the Bills or the Chargers or the Jets, all of them have good running back situations.
I think the scenario I'm picturing with Christian McCaffrey, if New Orleans doesn't take him, I picture San Francisco trading back from 2 for someone who's trying to go up to get a quarterback, and them wherever they land, whether that's like pick 6 or pick 8 or pick 12, I think they're going to take McCaffrey there. And I don't think Fournette's going until maybe Philadelphia at 14. So, yeah. Okay. Evan Birchfield asks, ESPN did a mock draft trade scenario where the Falcons get a 2017 second-round pick pick 54, 2018 first-round pick from the Dolphins, who get the Falcons' 31st overall first-round pick. What are your thoughts?
That's kind of crazy. I wouldn't hate it if they did that. I don't think they're going to get a great I don't think they'll get an amazing player at 54. I think they'll probably get like a Taylor Moton type there, and then look at or maybe even Chris Wormley there, and they get like Taylor Moton at the other pick. I wouldn't hate a situation like that though, because it means that you get a 2008 first round pick for basically still helping your team out. Whenever you can get 2 picks for 1, it's always a good thing. And I think that 2018 first-round pick is going to be a higher pick than wherever Atlanta's going to be selecting, because Atlanta's going to be in the playoffs, and I don't think the Dolphins will be.
I love this trade. And I'm not really big into trading down, but this is exactly what I would trade down for. I think if you're trading down in this draft, in my opinion, if you're not getting an extra second or an extra third round pick this year, then you need to get 2018 assets. Not necessarily because I feel like the Falcons are going to desperately need them, but I love having the option of having them. And we can get into this sort of cycle like the Patriots have gotten into, or like the Browns have gotten into, or are trying to get into, where you have all these draft assets in the future that you can sort of, if you need to trade one of them to get this veteran player that goes on the market. I don't know. Let's say in some reality, Khalil Mack punches Mark Davis in the face, and the Oakland Raiders say, we got to trade Khalil Mack because he punched our owner in the face. And like, hey, here's this first round pick we got from the Dolphins for Khalil Mack. We'll take him off your hands. Now, is that a completely ridiculous scenario? Absolutely. But the point is, having those assets, if you don't have them, you can't use them. And so I'd rather have them and not use them as opposed to not having them at all. So I would love this trade, absolutely. I don't think the overall talent level of the player that you're going to get at 31 versus 54 is going to be that different. I do think, generally speaking, in most drafts, there's a next tier of sort of those high-level second-round players, and that typically goes from about pick 25 in round 1 to about pick 48 or 54 in round 2. And I think you're going to be sitting pretty regardless of that point. And I think the Falcons at pick 31 are already in that realm. So I don't feel like to me, if you're taking a guy at 31, you're also probably taking him at 54. That's basically what I'm saying. The talent level isn't going to be stark unless it's a guy like a Malik McDowell where you're saying, oh, he's a top 15 talent, but he fell because of character issues. Pick 31, you're picking a second-round talent. You're picking a high-level second-round talent, but you're picking a second-round talent almost every single year. So I do it. Okay, final question from Evan Birchfield is, 5 years from now, when we look back at this draft, who do you think you'll go, wow, they went that late? About?
Oh, probably Chris Wormley. He's just a guy that I keep watching more and more of, because this is about the time of year that I've already got my board finished, but I'm just going back and watching guys that perform freakishly on the athlete scale. And I've kind of gorged myself on Jordan Willis film, and kind of gorged myself on Derek Rivers film, and kind of gorged myself on Trey Hendrickson film. Not worth watching Trey Hendrickson. Don't waste your time. Great athlete, fun to watch. He's not worth the first round hype that he might get as we get closer. He's a first round athlete, but he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. But Chris Wormley film, I think Wormley is going to be. We're going to be talking about Wormley the same way we talk about Fletcher Cox, the same way we talk about Gerald McCoy, the same way we talk about Ndamukong Suh, as that 3-tech, that taller 3-tech who just destroys people. Big fan of Wormley's. I think he does a great job. And I would love to have him in Atlanta.
Okay. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to get a specific player. I feel like it's going to be a safety, because this year's draft safety class is a strong one, and it's deep enough where you're going to be able to get good players in round 3, maybe or maybe even later. I'm trying to get a specific guy. Maybe someone like Eddie Jackson, who I think is not going to go get picked till day 3 because of the injury issue he has. Someone like Tedrick Thompson, I think, is going to be a solid NFL safety. I wouldn't necessarily say he's going to be a Pro Bowl or anything like that, but I think he'll be a solid starter in the league. Yeah, I think this is going to, the answer to this question really is just sort of like it really is dependent on where a guy gets picked. If you're talking about some of these guys that are going to be in that mid-round range, it's just really about going to the perfect situation, and it's hard to sort of guess that in terms of, oh, this guy turned into a Pro Bowler when he was like a 3rd or 4th round pick or something like that. So it's hard to sort of look at a guy and say, oh, yeah, he has Pro Bowl potential, but only if he goes to this specific team if they draft him. So let's see. Did we have any questions in the Facebook chat? I do not see one. Scott, do you have any comments? Shane Gray in the chat asked, have we already talked about Devontae Freeman's contract status? Do you have any thoughts on that?
We have not talked about Devontae Freeman's contract status. We haven't done that in a while because we've been very focused on the draft. Everything that I'm seeing, everything that I'm hearing, everything that's out there right now suggests that the Falcons are going to look at his contract after the draft and look at that true long-term extension. By the time he gets to training camp, he should be re-signed long-term. And I think that's probably the right move. I would re-sign him before I'd re-sign what's his name? Tevin Coleman.
Yeah. I forgot the report that came out earlier this week or last week, and that specifically about Devontae Freeman's contract situation, but it does sound a little bit more like they'll try to get a deal done this summer. We'll see. I thought of been expecting the Falcons to wait till after the season, or at least wait till the middle of the season to see how he started and give him like a mid-year extension similar to what we saw with Alford and Schrader last year. But it sounds like they might be willing to get a deal done before the season starts, which is fine. Like, I like Devontae quite a bit. I don't have a problem with paying him. In general, I'm anti-paying running backs for a second contract, but I'm more than willing to make an exception for Devontae Freeman. It sort of depends on how much they pay him. And as long as they're not like locked into guaranteed money, till he's like 31 or something like that, then I'm not going to complain too much about it. So, I hope that answers your question, Shane. And let me look at also if we got anything else in the chat. Yes, Chris, Scott does eat during every one of these shows. So that answers that question.
No, I don't.
All right. Well, guys, again, for those of you that joined at the beginning of the show, you heard some technical difficulties. Check us out on iTunes to sort of get the full audio of the Stephen White interview if you missed it. We will post this also on Pro Football Central on YouTube. Check out all of our archives at profootballcentral.com. And you know what to do. Subscribe on all the podcast platforms. I am at Falcons on Twitter. Scott is at Karasik S. The show's Twitter handle is Falcons PFC. If you want to get in mailbag questions, use the hashtag Falcons mailbag. Next week we'll talk schedule. Next week we'll be giving our final takes on the draft, and then the week after that we'll be talking draft. So that's the plan. That's what's on deck. Congratulations to Evan for winning the contest. For everybody else, better luck next time, losers. And that's our show this week. We got another question from one of our listeners in reference to this year's draft class. Evan Birchfield asks, compared to the last few years, how would you rank this year's pass rushing group?
I try to stay away from stuff like that because